There we are. We got Trevor? Why don't you make Trevor small? There we go. Okay, I think we're live. Good evening from Kiev. Good morning in North America. Welcome to the Ukraine Freedom Fund online panel to discuss the Armed Forces of Ukraine. My name is Andy Bain. I'm the Executive Director of the Ukrainian Freedom Fund. As a short background, the UFF was set up in 2014 to support the defense of Ukraine with a mission to support a free, independent, and democratic Ukraine. We've been operating since then, but more robustly since 2022, as you can imagine, helping provide equipment and other services to Ukraine, both as volunteers and as services. We did an analysis in 2023 to see what we could do most impactfully with the minimal budgets that NGOs have. And we realized that the thing Ukraine needed most was training and education. They were getting a lot of equipment and they were getting a lot of help, but their leadership was in many ways post-Soviet and needed assistance. The free market had taken over the business segment, but government and military and other sectors had not transformed as quickly. And so we decided to see what we could do in that area. We set up the Train and Assist program, and a large part of that is focused on strategic leadership, organizational leadership, operational management, bringing in retired, mostly Americans and a few other nationalities, Brits and Canadians, to help out at the senior levels in transforming both the techniques and skills, but also looking at the culture and evaluating how we can transform that. To help our supporters understand more of what we're doing, we decided to have this online panel tonight with some of the senior leadership that we brought over, work with in Ukraine, and to discuss. They're doing a lot of different things. We work with Kiev Polytechnic Institute and Kiev Mogila Strategic Leadership Program, also the General Staff and the J7. But they have in their time here, have had a lot of close relationship with the military, and they can talk to, given their perspectives, how the Ukrainian military is performing and what obstacles or opportunities they may have. So let me get straight to introducing who we have this evening. We're very honored to have Lieutenant General Trevor Cadieu, retired from the Canadian Army. He was a tank regiment commander. He was a mechanized brigade commander. He was a division commander, and he finished his 30-year career as the director of the Joint Staff for Canada. So he's one of the most senior Canadian officers, and he's been in Ukraine almost 2 years off and on, better part on, working with units in operational training and teaching them technical skills they need to perform better. So we have on my right, we have Rear Admiral Mark Montgomery. Admiral Montgomery served in the Navy. His later jobs included being the commander of a carrier task force and also the J5 plans officer for European Command, where he was closely involved with the accession of 7 different post-Soviet and Warsaw Pact countries into NATO, so he has a lot of experience in this part of the world. And we have Major General Charles Corcoran. Corky was he was an F-15 pilot, and then he became in the first group of F-22 pilots. And in the end part of his career, he was the head of the Air Force's Air Warfare Center. And I believe he finished up at A3 at the Pentagon in charge of air operations, where he was during the Russian invasion in 2022. And then we have Colonel Craig Wonson, retired Marine Corps, just got out in February. He had a great career as an infantry officer. In his later part of his career, he was the commanding officer of the Marine Corps Tactics and Operations Group. And then he went to the Naval War College in Newport, where he was a senior Marine representative for this last tour. And so they've all had experience out here in Ukraine, have been working with a lot of different units and staff And we want to tap into their knowledge to give our supporters an idea of what it really looks like on the ground here. So I'll turn it over. Trevor, would you like to, we gave you some guidance of what's made the biggest impression on you during your time about Ukraine's leadership, please feel free to introduce yourself any way you like.
Okay, Andy, many thanks. Can you hear me okay? Andy, you got me loud and clear?
We've got you.
Okay, great. Hey, first of all, Andy, many thanks to you. Also, I'm very grateful to your supporters and to everybody that's joined in on the discussion. Up front, I do want to recognize the work of the Ukrainian Freedom Fund. Andy, as you know, I've spent a lot of time out here, and over the last few years, as I circulate and support the training of different Ukrainian battalions and brigades and operational tactical group of forces, I run into a lot of leaders that have taken your training, and they're better for it. And I've seen how that started to transform some of these command and leadership mindsets on the battlefield. So many thanks to you. In terms of by way of introduction, I'll keep this very concise. Just one of the things that's really impressed me, or it's really had an impact on me these last few years. I want to focus on the human domain, which I think is sometimes lost in these conversations. First of all, I just want to recognize the incredible burden of command in this environment for Ukrainian leaders. That's a term that we talk about often in NATO and in Western militaries, but here it takes on a whole different meaning. For starters, a lot of these leaders have been at war in combat, close combat against the enemy for a decade plus, in some cases, and so leader fatigue is an issue. Of course, these leaders sustain incredible casualties, killed and wounded at a scale that Western militaries would not recognize today. And then finally, something that's novel to this environment is that unlike Western militaries that are primarily expeditionary, so we train our troops, they deploy abroad into operations, and they do so with the confidence that their families are looked after on the home front. In Ukraine, of course, families are also at incredible risk. So while their loved ones are separated from them, deployed into operations, families are also being targeted. And that also weighs on senior military leaders in Ukraine. So that's kind of the first kind of human thing that I wanted to recognize. Second is I also want to recognize what I would call their strategic resilience. What has been truly noteworthy over these last 3 years is how the whole of Ukrainian society has mobilized to support the armed forces of Ukraine. And so just about everybody that's left in the country is either wearing a uniform or supporting somebody that's wearing a uniform. So ordinary Ukrainians who are facilitating recruiting and mobilization efforts, the training of Ukrainian soldiers, equipping them, innovating, sustaining them with logistics, helping with strategic communications. And so that's a significant undertaking by this society. So Andy, in terms of introductory remarks, I think I just want to kind of prime the pump with that. I'm happy to address more of these issues and others as we go forward.
Excellent. Thanks, Trevor. We'll get everyone to introduce themselves, and we got questions that we've come up with, and that a lot of the people who registered have as well. So we'll get to those. Admiral Montgomery, would you like to say something?
Well, thanks, and it's great to follow Trevor, and I'm glad to be here in person with Corky and Craig. And thanks to you, Andy, and thanks to UFF for the leadership role that you played here in areas beyond what we're going to talk about today, but also in this education effort with the Ukrainian military and senior leadership. To me, it's one of these unique things. I also support Taiwan, and I've noticed something where in these two very demanding cases dealing with authoritarian states, the United States has taken a fairly hands-off approach to the education of how to use our weapon systems, how to fight, how to, the kind of, the NATO, generally accepted US or NATO manner of conducting war fighting. And so it's really challenging. You're given $60 billion worth of gear, and not the kind of education that might be used. I'm not talking about the education of how to fly an F-16. We got that, and Corky talked to that, or the education of how to fire a howitzer. This is about how you employ these and things like that. And so, and then even more at the strategic operational level, when you drop 60 billion on somebody, and should be clear here, that's the U.S. It's about $60 billion worth of security gear, about 120 billion overall. Not 100% sure where someone might get a number like 300 billion, but it's a much smaller level, but matched generally by our European friends in both those categories. But you drop all that on them, and then they don't necessarily have the ligature for how to take care of it. So to me, one of the biggest areas that I think there's value, and the reason we talk, it's more the unusual places like Kiev Polytechnic or the business school or the Ministry of Defense or the G7 on the Joint Staff, is to talk about how you do planning and budgeting, how you think about this. At some point, there's going to be a pause in fighting. And when there is, both sides are going to be rapidly reconstituting, except we really haven't gone over the life cycle maintenance associated with all this equipment we've given them. And this is really going to meet its apex, I think, with the F-16, and Corky will probably talk about that later. But I'll just say the higher end it is, the more care and feeding it needs. And all of us in our U.S. military or Canadian military careers had to deal with this. So early on in our careers, we learned about life cycle maintenance, about preventative maintenance, routine maintenance, depot level maintenance, maintaining a supply store that's full. These are all challenging things. And normally the U.S. does a great job when they help a country in what's called foreign military sales or foreign military financing, and making sure you get the whole package. Well, when we were pushing stuff out, like we were pushing out a C-17 flying over the strip, kind of providing that assistance over the first year and a half, is what we weren't doing that. So kind of how to think about that, how to do this strategic planning and budgeting, how to look at it. It's very easy to be drawn to what are the things I need in the next year to stay alive, to keep my troops alive. I get that. But if you don't do what I need to do in the next 2 to 3 years to keep my equipment functioning properly, or the 3 to 5 years to develop the next software iteration that supports it, you could be in a lot of trouble. So that budgeting, planning, and kind of services element, there's important work there that needs to be done. And again, unusually for a partner that we're so heavily financially invested in, we haven't, over both of the last two administrations, done that kind of ligature, that kind of that work. So I think that's an exciting thing, and it's something we can, the kind of people you get together can uniquely talk to as an education effort.
Well, yeah, and tomorrow you're leading a forum at Kiev Polytechnic to discuss just that. And I think we talked about it a number of times this week. But thanks, Corky. Would you like to introduce?
Yeah, Andy. Thank you. I want to echo both Trevor and Monty, starting off by thanking you and your team at the Ukraine Freedom Fund for offering us the opportunity to continue to do meaningful work here to support Ukraine's defense. It means the world to have this opportunity. So thank you, and thanks to all your donors. To your opening question, what has impressed me most about Ukraine's military leadership that we've been engaging with? I'd like to start really broad in this human element that Trevor was mentioning. It's not just the leadership, but the younger folks in the military we engage. And literally, I'm not exaggerating, everybody I run into, or I have run into on my 3 trips here in the past year, the thing that strikes me most is every conversation starts with immense gratitude. The first thing I get from every Ukrainian I speak with is thank you. That says something about what you're doing, Andy. And to you and your donors, I say thank you. But it also strikes me because I immediately think we should be thanking the Ukrainians, because they're the ones who are fighting this fight that was more than just an attack on Ukraine. It was an attack on the way of life that we put in place, our greatest generation put in place with like-minded allies and partners after the end of World War II. And it's made the world most peaceful and prosperous in the history of humankind. And it's just, it's nonsense to me if we don't do all we can to help Ukraine. More focused on the specific question of the military leadership in that military area, what has impressed me is they're striving, as Trevor mentioned, to change their culture from the Soviet mindset to more of the Western mindset that those of us at this table and Trevor know and love. What I mean by that is that Soviet culture, that Soviet military culture, is an extension of that authoritarian regime that they were raised in. It's based on a foundation of fear. Individual soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, they can't act unless they're directed to do so. And when they run into fog and friction, which they always will on the battlefield, they're paralyzed. They have to ask for permission before they can do anything else. Whereas our military and the Western militaries are based on a foundation of trust, such that our junior officers and young enlisted personnel can take the commander's guidance and intent and act. And they know that their boss is going to have their back. And when they run into uncertainty on the battlefield, which will always happen, they make the best decision they can with the information they have available, and they move out. And they're generally going to get it right. But when they don't, when they make mistakes, which are invariably going to happen, again, they're trusted. So they come forward, they talk about it, everybody learns, and the entire organization gets better. Whereas in that culture of fear, mistakes are hidden, people die, and again, it just doesn't work. It also prevents them, therefore, from doing any kind of large-scale operations or joint operations. You have here a joint group. We have represented on this panel Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines. And in our forces in the Western way of fighting, we all are trained together. We work together day in and day out, and that allows us to conduct these seamless joint operations at a scale and a speed that is just not possible in these militaries that are based on that authoritarian mindset. And so it's tough to change a culture, and that's what I applaud the Ukrainian leadership for trying to do this in the midst of a fight, fighting for your survival while also trying to change that culture. But the youngest members of the military are grasping it, and they're doing their best to change, and the leaders are doing their best to change. And it's an honor, really, like I said, to be here to try to help guide them through that change. And when we get them there, it will be truly an asymmetric advantage over the Russians. So thank you.
Great, thanks, Corey. Craig, would you like, I should have pointed out, we do have a combined joint panel here today between multinational and all the services represented, at least as far as American services considered. But Craig, if you want to chime in?
Yeah, absolutely. And first of all, I'll echo what my colleagues have already said by thanking you, Andy, for all the great work that you've done since 2014. You and the Ukrainian Freedom Fund, just like Corky said, everybody that we've spoken with is very appreciative on all the support that UFF has provided. And it's clear that UFF has made a significant impact across the country. So thanks first and foremost to that. Secondly, I'd like to just take a second to recognize all of those people that have served and supported UFF, both past and present. There's been a lot of people I know that have worked with UFF. They've all speak very highly of it, and they've seen firsthand the impact that UFF can make and does make. I didn't know any of my colleagues that are with me here today prior to coming to Ukraine, but their past accomplishments and their professional reputations speak for themselves. And I highlight that because that's indicative of what you're seeing with the caliber of individuals that are all across the country right now supporting UFF. You basically assembled an all-star team worth of people who are outstanding educators, outstanding in leadership development, and they're having a direct impact, again, across the entire country by supporting, the Ukrainian people in every corner of the country. So it's an amazing thing to watch. And then finally, very quickly, just touching upon our Ukrainian friends over here, those that are helping directly with us in UFF, but also those that we work with throughout the course of the week and such. They've endured so much, and they're an inspiration to us just watching them continue to fight the good fight. Very quickly, a couple of things that I would highlight that stood out to me, and building on what Corky just highlighted with culture change, is as we going forward trying to help Ukraine evolve with its doctrine and lessons learned development. And the word doctrine isn't always as embraced because it's or it doesn't get people excited because it doesn't go bang and it doesn't fly at Mach 2 or anything like that. But doctrine is a critically foundational piece of any military success. And although some may view it at times as being dogmatic or inflexible or too rigid. Doctrine actually, as we all know, and certainly we know in the U.S. military, provides those key foundational principles in which a military operates that have been basically put together in blood and oftentimes have been learned from very painful lessons. And what we see, of course, again, tying to what Corky just said about culture, is there's still some remnants of old Soviet era doctrine that still permeate through how the Ukrainian forces operate, and they recognize that. But as we move forward, we want to replace things like centralized command and control with things that are going to make them or give them a greater advantage on the battlefield, such as decentralized control and allowing subordinate leaders to exercise initiative to seize the advantage when they see those opportunities. And secondly, their lesson was learned, which is similar to doctrine and feeds into doctrine, but lessons learned obviously is multifaceted, where it's also helping to shape a lot of or share that situational awareness on the latest tactics, techniques, and procedures across the entire force, in giving people an opportunity to be aware of capability gaps and the latest things that are working or not working. And then whatever elements of that actually are foundational, that can change the foundational way of fighting, will work its way into doctrine. So again, as we saw last night, I think in one of our discussions, lessons learned has not been formalized here, but it is something that the Ukrainians are definitely interested in, that will help build their essay and get them focused in the right direction on changes on the battlefield.
Excellent. Thanks, Craig. Well, let's. We've got an hour panel. I should have said at the beginning we only have an hour, but we wanted to talk Turkey and get into some details that people here in Ukraine can see that aren't as obvious in North America. I will say that at UFF in 2022 there was a lot of demand for things like first aid training and how to tie a tourniquet, but there was not a lot of interest at the higher levels of command and national security as to how to run things. But in the last 6 months, I'd say we've seen a turnaround in that. But Trevor, I'd like to ask you if how have Ukrainian concepts of military leadership and command evolved in the crucible of high-intensity conventional warfighting, as one of our registrants asked.
Thanks, Andy. Just to riff off of one of Corky's earlier points, certainly there was this perception that immediately following the start of the full-scale invasion, that a number of Ukrainian leaders were still very heavily influenced by the Soviet mindset, and to a degree that's probably fair. Of course, just consider the mobilization challenge early on. They had to bring in a whole bunch of people out of retirement. And many of those leaders, their only military experience was serving with and for the Soviet army. And when you think about that, that may not have been such a bad thing early on, because those leaders, they really did understand the Russian way of war as this conflict started. But quickly, though, I would say that, I think there was recognition amongst our Ukrainian friends that the Russian Federation army was never going to be defeated by a smaller version of the Russian Federation army. And so fairly early on, even though if it wasn't fully practiced initially, there was recognition that they needed to change their command and battlefield leadership approaches. And that's when this discussion about a Ukrainian version of mission command started to take place. Now, for starters, many of those early leaders that did have that Soviet mindset, a number of them have sadly been killed, wounded, a number have been retired off, and in their place, there's a generation of much younger leaders that have come in, and with them, fresh perspectives. And so it's very common now when I'm circulating or training teams, and Andy, I think your instructors are also seeing this, but you'll now see battalion commanders, so leaders that are commanding units of about 500 soldiers in their early 20s. brigade commanders that command 4,000 to 5,000 troops in their late 20s, early 30s. I've even run into a corps commander. So this is a leader that will have about 8,000 to 10,000 troops under his command in his early 30s. So that's one thing that's changed. Another, which is significant, it has its advantages and its disadvantages, is that, of course, Ukraine relies almost entirely now on mobilized Ukrainians. And so, with few exceptions, most recruits that are coming in now lack any sort of professional military education. And there is an advantage to that, and that is that they're bringing in leaders with different viewpoints, different perspectives. For example, in the early days after the full-scale invasion, I trained at brigade headquarters, and their G5, their chief of plans, he was very good. And I had asked him what his experience was, expecting to hear that he had served in the Soviet Army previously. He had no military experience. He was a business leader based out of Kyiv, and he had a master's in business administration. And what he was using in that command post were the problem-solving tools that he had gotten from his academic education. And so we are seeing this unique emergence or blend of youth with these different perspectives that Ukrainians have acquired in their civilian careers, and they're applying that to their own unique version of mission command. Now, what they're doing to try to institutionalize this is, first of all, they are fully embracing Western planning tools. So they're trying to adopt the NATO standard military decision-making process. Their commander-in-chief assigned a directive that planning tool is going to be integrated into all echelons of command at the tactical level. So battalions, brigades, their operational tactical group of forces. They're also trying to professionalize their military education process, empower their senior non-commissioned members, and they are trying to institutionalize a lessons learned process as well. And so there are some private entities, but also in their J7 at the Joint Staff, in their general staff, they've embraced the lessons learned process that they're trying to push throughout the force. The last thing I would just say on this is there are unique challenges with adopting a mission command approach. So one that relies on trust and the disciplined use of initiative by your subordinates. There are unique challenges in a mobilized military. The idea of relying on trust, relying on the initiative of your subordinates, that's predicated on the notion that they have sufficient or adequate experience to actually use their initiative on the battlefield in a safe way, to mitigate risks and to take advantage of opportunities. And a mobilized force, that's much, much harder to do. And so initially, they need to have a little more positive control until they can build up that experiential base. And then they can rely on subordinate initiative a little bit more. And what I would challenge all of us to consider is if the West is prepared for something similar. Yes, we do have highly trained troops, and we embrace a mission command mindset. But in a high-intensity conventional warfight, those highly trained troops are going to be attrited as well. And it's conceivable that our militaries might have to rely on mobilized citizens. And so I think we also have to turn our mind to how will we quickly build up the experience of young recruits so that we can empower them on the battlefield. So I do acknowledge that they started with these Soviet mindsets. I think there's a concerted effort to try to change that. And their embracing of education and professional military education, which the UFF is playing a big part in, I think it's very significant towards working towards that. Andy?
Thanks for that. Actually, I think to that comment, a lot of the senior leadership we know, they understand the buzzwords, they understand that they need to know it. They've accepted that, but they just don't know what it looks like. And having you all come up and walk them through, okay, that's the concept, but here's what it really looks like. I think that opens their eyes enormously, and it's hugely valuable. But to that extent, not to look too contrived, but we have this list. I have a list of questions for you, Monty. What other lessons does Ukraine's experience offer NATO in terms of force structure capabilities military readiness.
Well, thanks. First I'll pick up right on Trevor's and say, how do you do mobilization? We have a couple examples. Israel, not in NATO, but most of us know Israel. Finland, Estonia. There are some models out there, but they are intense cultural. They're a cultural decision to kind of go that way. So there's a challenge there. But I think really the number one thing that we've learned over 2.5 years is the kind of in terms of the NATO capabilities, weapon systems, I think about is the relentless nature of the authoritarian use of cruise, ballistic, hypersonic missiles and drones. Ironically, an area where we took a busman's holiday in our defense for the last 25 years, fighting two enemies, fighting in Afghanistan and Iraq, where air defense was not at a premium and therefore became a very low priority, particularly for our ground forces. And as a result, many, we went, when I was a junior officer in NATO, doing, naval deployments and cruises. I remember that the order of battle was the U.S. had 30 to 35 batteries of Hawk and IHawk and Rapier systems. When now we couldn't generate, or the 35 battalions, I'm sorry, we couldn't generate 2 today, at the start of this conflict. So learning that we need to really build those systems has become a big one. Is that air defense. And here's a brutal truth. We have allowed the cost per shot to get so high on those systems that we don't talk about this every day, but when the replacement cost for Patriot, when it was President drawdown, when it was granted to the Ukrainians or the President drawdown authority is about $3.2 million. The AMRAAM missile associated with the NASAMS air defense cruise missile defense system, $1 million a copy. These are jaw-dropping numbers to engage what might be a $30,000 drone. So probably not a Patriot in that case, but still maybe $100,000 cruise missile. This is a bad return. So we've learned that. A second big area is electronic warfare. Again, our adversary in Afghanistan, Iraq didn't practice jamming against us. We didn't need electronic warfare to get our weapons through. So again, we took a holiday. And one of the things you notice is that if the United States stops doing something, pretty slowly, the French are usually last to lose their grip on it, but everyone in NATO begins to follow our lead. And so again, another area, and if I could give you one more, societal resilience. It kind of chips on what Trevor said, but looking at the society itself, this is a strong society here. We could learn a lot from that. I mentioned earlier that I work with Taiwan. They've noticed that, they've learned a lot of lessons from Ukraine. Mostly indirectly bag shot, reading articles, not because there's Taiwan officers here in Ukraine. But one of the strongest ones they've learned is you've got to build a societal resilience so that you can withstand the persistent, comprehensive attack that comes from an authoritarian state. And that's a challenging one for them, and it's been a challenging one for Ukraine, but they've withstood the test. So to me, those are those big, 3 or 4 areas that NATO has some lessons to learn on. I should mention, we always talk about drones. I'll just say, yes, there's a lot about drones, both unmanned surface vessels for their Navy, but also the kamikaze drones we see. And there's a lot, but in that regard, I think that's learning for everyone, everywhere, not just for NATO.
It's interesting because not long ago, I heard someone, one of the officers referring to there are 2 fronts. There's the front between the Ukrainian trench line and the Russian trench line, but there's also the front between Ukrainian electronic warfare capabilities and Russian electronic warfare capabilities. And while they mirror each other somewhat, they're different, and they both have to be acknowledged. To that extent, Corky, what Russian military systems, capabilities, or operational methods have proven most effective or unexpectedly resilient?
Yeah, I think it kind of goes back to my earlier comments about the structure of the Soviet military and now Russian military. It tells you exactly what they can do well. Anything that requires a lot of agility and critical thinking real time is probably not their bailiwick, but anything where you can throw mass at it, they're going to be really good at it. And this fight has affirmed that. Things like electronic warfare, which Monty already hit on. We learned early on that a lot of the weapons and weapon systems that we provided Ukraine from the West Like Monty said, we had taken a holiday, and those weapons and weapon systems were not resilient enough to fight through the dense electronic attack that the Russians had placed across the battlefield. And you're not going to take out that capability. They've got a lot of it, mass again. So we've adjusted, and we've helped Ukraine adjust. But it reaffirmed that Russia's going to be able to bring mass there. They also bring mass with their air defenses, and because of that, combined with the lack of the capabilities on the Ukrainian side to take down a traditional integrated air defense system, that's created a no man's land for either side to fly near the front lines, and so you end up in this trench warfare. So they brought mass to electronic warfare. They brought mass to air defenses. They've also showed some real agility in how they develop some equipment. Since they can't fly near the front lines, get close enough to deliver their traditional bombs, they adjusted to a glide bomb, as they call it, which is something similar to what we have, where you put wings on a traditional munition, and they've used that to great effect. They've been able to stay outside of Ukraine's air defenses and drop very large weapons, have them go a long way and do tremendous damage inside of Ukraine. Another area is the drone fight. Ukraine, I think, is iterating much faster, but Russia has adapted. Again, back to that electronic warfare environment, I think they were one of the first to use fiber optics on their drones to allow their drones to navigate through that electronic warfare environment unaffected and get to the target. So a couple of innovative things, but mostly it's about the Russians bringing mass, and that's what they do best.
Craig, you want to follow up on that? How does the emergence of small, inexpensive unmanned systems change the calculus of force projection and survivability?
Yeah, I think that small systems, UAS is, I don't want to call it a game changer, but it's definitely something that has to be taken into account on the battlefield. UAS in general has been used to great effect for now over 2 decades. We've used large UAS, as we all know, in the past, and how effective that's been. And as far back as a decade ago, I can remember when I was still on active duty, we were already exploring ways to employ small UAS in great numbers, the same way that they're being used right now on the battlefield here. And then in 2020, I think everybody saw what Azerbaijan did in their conflict with Armenia, and what happened there with the use of small mass-produced drones, and that kind of set the tone for where we're at today. So they're definitely something that has changed the calculus there. But I think depending on what numbers you're looking at, anywhere between 70 and 80% of the casualties being sustained right now on both sides are the result of unmanned systems. So how do you address that, which is what everybody, I think, is trying to determine right now? You address it the same way you address any changes to technological developments and capabilities that make their way onto the battlefield. You first have to modify the way your tactics, the way you're operating, TTPs. That's the number one thing you do, because that's the fastest thing that you can do. That may be more dispersion, that may be more cover and concealment, or deception. Whatever you can do to alter your tactics and techniques and procedures to help make you more survivable. Concurrent with that, obviously, there needs to be some kind of technical solution as well to help address some of the capabilities that these new systems have. So right now, as Corky correctly highlighted, fiber optic cables are the latest thing that we're going to have to figure out a way to not just change our TTPs, but also develop some kind of technology, if it hasn't already been developed, to try to address that. And this is nothing new. We saw this in Iraq, obviously, with the improvised explosive devices. We went back and forth with the adversary. They would try a new tactic. We would develop a new, whether it's a up-armored Humvee or a mine-resistant, ambush-protected vehicle. We're always trying to stay one step ahead. So you're going to continue to see that cat and mouse game back and forth with people employing the drones and people trying to find the counter drone capability.
Excellent. Thank you. Trevor, would you like to chime in on that? What innovations you've seen in a tactical or technological level or organizational that impressed you?
Sure, Andy. I don't want to flog this point on drones, but I'm not entirely sure that all Western militaries, maybe with the exception of the United States, have fully understood and embraced how ubiquitous the use of drones are on this battlefield. They're absolutely everywhere at the front, out at the front lines. They are being used to great effect by both sides for reconnaissance, strike, and logistics applications. Our friends here now are deploying ground-based drones, UGVs, to deliver combat supplies to forward positions, to extract casualties, to lay mines. There are drones in the air, maritime, and land domains, and they're experimenting with new applications. And so I do think that's something that Western militaries need to wrap their mind around. Secondly is kind of how they use those drones. So inside a command post, one of the things that I have found is very, very impressive from a Ukrainian perspective is how they, what we would call the kill triangle, how that functions in their command and control nodes. And so in that kill triangle, you got kind of three corners to it. One is the intelligence, which establishes a theory of where the enemy is. That cues the second element, which are their surveillance systems. So they're primarily their unmanned systems to find that threat element. And then they cue fires very, very quickly and dynamically. So artillery, strike drones, electronic warfare to target Russian systems. And they do that extremely well. It's something that we understand in theory, but that we haven't fully practiced in a high-intensity conventional warfighting setting. And then maybe the last one that I would say, just to go back to this discussion around battlefield sustainment, as Western militaries and NATO contemplates these multinational coalition structures in the armed forces of Ukraine, we do have a force that has fielded almost every major NATO military system. And they've had to work through the challenges of not just operating those systems, but sustaining them, making sure that they're scaled for the right spare parts, the specialty tooling. And as NATO militaries contemplate some of these coalition operations, I think there's a lot that we can learn from Ukraine in terms of battlefield sustainment. Andy?
Yeah, thanks, Trevor. It's interesting. We work with Kiev Polytechnic KPI, and they have a defense innovation department now, the way MIT might have a physics department. And the head of that took me to a high school about a year and a half ago. And there's a high school now, the way there might be a musical high school in the United States. There's a drone high school not far from KPI where they took us in, and in a gym-like room, there were kids, half the kids were on computers learning how to use drone joysticks on a computer screen. The other half were flying them around the room, and they were all in uniform. But it's to your point about the ubiquity of drones, it permeates the whole culture. But to segue into that, Monty, how would you characterize the role and effectiveness of Western military assistance, given the way the Ukrainians have taken the ball on some of their own innovations? But the systems like heavy armor and artillery and HIMARS air defense, how are those shaping up tempo and tactical outcomes?
You have to be careful when you do this assessment. You have to assess it at the moment, right? Temporally, what did it mean at the moment it was delivered versus now looking back saying, well, that weapon hasn't been that critical on the battlefield, or that this weapon has been. I think what I'd say is I would describe Western military assistance as just enough, right? Mm-hmm. It was enough. I want to put a number on this. We've given about 60 billion, our European allies about the same. In security assistance, we've given another 60 billion in humanitarian and others. Each of us are in the 120 to 130, 140 range. It appears to be a lot of money. I would tell you the combined $120 billion worth of security assistance was probably 5 years, actually 6 years worth of pre-war budgeting dumped on them as procurement only, almost, heavily procurement only equipment deliveries. So what I'd say was it was a lot of things. Some of them were the right things at the right time. Some of them were the the wrong things at the right time, and some of them were the wrong things at the wrong time, right? In other words, they were never going to play a role, and they've been consigned to the dustbin. So first, I put it in that it's a mixed bag, but it was being delivered very rapidly. Ukraine was trying to pick off wish lists of what were being offered. I would say that some of the presidential drawdown assistance, which was really some of the most important stuff, was fantastically timely. Like, it arrived weeks after being asked. On the other hand, it showed up non-functional on occasion, which is kind of less desirable in a weapon system, right? So especially when you have none of the maintenance technicians here. But this gets to the most important thing, which is that this military assistance was not conducted by the normal rules of the game. And the normal rules of the game are, when you buy F-35 from the United States, you don't pay $75 million, which is they get it off the shelf, at Walmart cost. We make you pay $125 million. Some of it's in deferred payments, but that is you buying a life cycle maintenance plan. We're making sure that you get the spare parts, the training, the phase, the equipment that you need to do the maintenance, because we don't want to see an F-35 rotting away on a runway 6 months later. It's bad for future sales, right? And so, but we didn't do that here. And did it matter on, artillery round? No. But did it matter on an F-16? Yes. So my point on this is, my assessment of Western military assistance is, at the time, it appeared to be the right thing coming just in time. In hindsight, you see lots of errors. The final thing I'll add is, the strictures we put on some of that assistance really did hurt. It was inappropriate. It was done because of a sense of we don't want to provoke Russia. Let's be clear. Russia's invading a country. We are providing that country with $120 billion worth of security assistance. The provocations, whichever side of that you're on, the provocations in play, and the idea that, well, they might break out a nuclear weapon if the ATACMS can be used at maximum range, I think was overly simplistic and self-deterring. It was kind of the provocation principle, and it was unfortunate, and it put a pall over a lot of discussions. And we saw it in the ATACMS with the long-range strike weapon. We saw it in the Gimlet, the guided missile launcher rockets when they first came. We saw it with the Abrams tanks discussion. We saw it with the F-16s. In fact, we're still seeing it with the F-16s, I think, to some degree. So my point on all this is, it was what was needed at the moment. It wasn't, in hindsight, perfect. Lots of lessons learned from that. But most of all, we better help these guys transition. And this is where the United States is going to be critical. And so the United States still has to be a player. We have to help them transition from a military getting just-in-time delivery of whatever they need at that exact moment to a military that can maintain and sustain the systems they have in a way that a rapacious neighbor is deterred from another bite at the apple because he knows that the Ukrainians are armed properly with the equipment they need to smack them down again.
And they know how to use properly.
And they know how to use, and then, of course, here, part of I'd say strategically, we give advice on what right looks like in that kind of strategic approach. But then you say, additionally, as Trevor's mentioned, with either, battlefield, with circulation, or more in this case, with explicit education opportunities that you provide, that they know how to use it properly.
Well, I mean, it just, to say what a little bit is, a year ago, Corky was out here with General Deptula and the Air Force General Staff, and we met and explained how there's no one on the General Staff from the Air Force, and the lesson you all preached has become reality, I think, in large part because you preached it to them. I mean,
so now there's one general on the
there's
Air
one
Force general on the General Staff.
but we're still working on the Navy.
Still working on the Navy.
But
With those 72 slots still there.
Yeah. But Corey, what do you assess as Ukraine's greatest residual battlefield challenges, both short and long term?
Yeah, I guess I think I'd piggyback on what Monty just said. In the short term, they got to make sure that they can stand up to this continued flurry from Russia, where they're trying to gain just a little more land, a little more space, a little more leverage prior to coming to any negotiating table. And that's tough with the limited air defenses they have, with the limited human capital they have. But standing up to and holding the line against this near-term Russian push is key. But in the longer term, it's everything Monty said. I think it was Thucydides in his account of the Peloponnesian War said he observed warfare is always going to take longer and cost more than anyone plans for. He wrote that over 2 centuries ago, and it's held true for 100% of the conflict since.
Possibly 2 millennia ago.
Both. Millennium. He's a good math guy. Yeah, 460 BC or so. But so you gotta be ready for that, and we're not ready. We're not ready, and Ukraine's not ready. So we got to get them looking long term, and us and our like-minded partners have got to make sure they're resourced from a human perspective, from a munitions perspective, from a weapon systems perspective for the long term so they stop this initial attack, but then they can deter long term and if necessary defeat.
I can't pick up on that only because I've heard Corky talk about it. I've watched Corky with the Air Force team. I know General Deptula did too, about, and this gets at Trevor's point, that you do see some old school think. And so trying to figure out how to not fly F-16s like MiG-16s, but instead figuring out what you've been telling them about not about fighting like how the United States fights, talking about the culture of the U.S. Air Force, U.S. Navy use in strike and counter air and things, and not the tough ground control intercept of the old Soviet Air Force that permeates the current Russian Air Force and elements of the Ukrainian Air Force.
Yeah, this close control micromanagement of every single airplane, it prevents you from doing large scale at speed joint operations. And so it's holding them back, but we'll get them there, I'm confident.
Excellent. Well, Craig, why don't we start closing out? What have you seen? What's your take on the level of morale amongst the Ukrainian military that you've run across?
I think what we've all seen is morale is sky high across the populace, both civilian and military, and obviously that's critically important. That hasn't always been the case in the past when we've supported partners and allies in similar situations. There's sometimes been some fluctuation in morale and such depending on how things are playing out. But this is a struggle for national survival for Ukraine. This is a struggle for independence. Those are things that obviously should resound with most Americans. And because of that, and because they all believe firmly in those things, and because they're not subject to, well, I guess they're subject to it, but they're not easily tricked by a lot of the false narrative that's circulating out there, that Ukraine has always been part of Russia, or that the Ukrainian government is fascist and things like that. They're fully invested in the future of their country. So across the board, morale is sky high. Now, will morale tend to fluctuate within military organizations? Yes, it will. And oftentimes that's directly linked to things that we talked about last night with some of their military leadership, right? How good are the leaders there? How well are they being trained? Esprit de corps, unit cohesion, all of those things that are intangibles that often get overlooked. When you see units here that have strong leaders, and you see units here that are well trained, morale is sky high. If you see units that are just starting to form, they're going to struggle a little bit more. So, and I think the Ukrainians have correctly identified that. They've targeted leadership development as something that's going to help directly tie to morale. They've targeted the need to ensure that units are properly trained, because that gives the confidence, and again ties directly to morale. But the last thing that I'll say is, there's a lot of people that will say, well, because morale is an intangible and it can't be measured. I would disagree with that. I've always used performance as a strong metric on whether or not morale is where it needs to be. And I think if you look over the last couple of years, and how the Ukrainians have, performed in places like Kharkiv and, what they're currently doing up in the Kursk Oblast, or Mariupol would be an ideal example that I would use, right? There was an example where you had a large number of troops there that knew they were going to be surrounded, but they bought time and they bought space for the rest of the military to do what they needed to do, and tied down an inordinate amount of Russian forces and fought to the last cartridge there. You don't have that if somebody just tells you, hey, you need to fight to the last cartridge. That right there is indicative of strong morale, good leadership, and a dedication to what they're doing. And they're doing that across the entire front. That's that's indicative of how they're fighting. So morale is exceptionally strong here, and I think that's going to lead them to victory in the long term.
And they say this, in the last 5 weeks, I've been out meeting operational commands in the South and the East, 5 of those weeks. And to a man, it's a relaxed self-assuredness amongst the command and amongst the troops. There's no doubt. I've never seen any doubt as to the outcome of the war. It's a matter of how quickly and how effectively they can do it. I think we need to start wrapping up. But one thing I think our supporters may ask is, why is NATO or someone else doing what we're doing in that respect? And I can address that, but if anyone, Trevor, I'll ask you to give a parting comment. But if anyone wants to address that, we might want to discuss it as we close.
Okay. Yeah, Andy, I won't comment on necessarily what NATO is and is not doing. I recognize every nation has their, their respective policies, but clearly by having to operate in the near abroad outside of this country kind of degrades the level of support that the Western Alliance can provide to Ukraine. My finishing thought, I think, just to circle back to where we started, is like, for me, how inspirational Ukrainian resilience is. They've had soldiers near the Flot that have been in their positions for over 150 days. Like I said before, they have leaders that have been fighting this fight for a decade, and as a nation, they've been subjected to some pretty significant strategic shocks, especially in recent months. I think one of the things that keeps them going, although they want a ceasefire, but they need it backed by some sort of security guarantee, because they don't want to hand this problem over to their children. And so they are motivated, and they'll keep going as long as they possibly can, and as long as they have the resources to do so, despite these intense pressures. Hey, Andy, again, thanks for hosting this discussion, and thanks for everything you're doing. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Trevor. Lonnie, any parting words?
Hey, so first, I agree with Trevor. I think this is, operating in the near abroad, both the United States and NATO, that's a challenge. And, that causes the need for someone like Trevor to be doing what he's doing, for Ukrainian Freedom Fund to be doing what you're doing. So that's fine. I appreciate what Craig is saying. I'm not ready to say sky high. I think I'd like to describe the morale. I look at them and say they're fatigued, but they're focused and, like you said, confident. I'd say compared to maybe our Afghan and Iraqi partners, that might be sky high. But I love that. I love to think about that a little bit. But the thing I want to mention is the United States. It's been a rough couple months for the United States and Ukraine, but the reality is 2 things are needed here. The continued intelligence support, the warning, gives their air defenses a better chance, gives their offensive systems a better chance. We've got to keep that going. And the second is the United States, and this should be easy. The United States needs to keep the store open. Our defense industrial base needs to be available for Europeans and Ukrainians, and maybe even the U.S., to buy weapon systems for Ukraine, to buy that life cycle maintenance in us. Very glad to see just 2 days ago, the United States announced a package for F-16 maintenance that I think Cork, you'd agree with me, is critical. So I think we're on the right. Look, I'm comfortable. I agree with Trevor's assessment, and yours, that they are focused and confident, and that's a lot of what's necessary to win. And I think I think that I'm comfortable when I come back here 4 or 5 months from now for another training session. It'll be or another education session that they'll be in as good or better position.
Yeah. Thanks, Corky. Any parting thoughts?
Yeah, Andy, thanks again to you, your fellow team members, all your donors who support the efforts, and to my fellow panel members. I guess a good way to finish is to answer a question you asked me before we came online. Was, if I were to jump back in uniform, what would be my most urgent go-to? And other than getting a haircut and finding a uniform that fits, I think there are two things that really need fixed in the U.S., and then 2 positive takeaways. The 2 things that really need fixed, number one, we hit on it a lot, but we aren't ready for a long-haul fight, and our allies aren't ready. From a human capital perspective, from a munitions perspective, from a weapon system sustainment and numbers perspective, we got to be able to rapidly build and deliver those things and rapidly train people. So we need to get after that. And then the other thing is we do not rapidly adopt and deliver new technology to the battlefield. The Ukrainians have done amazing things there. It would be foolish for us to not learn those lessons. On the positive side, and I'll end here, I think there are two things that we have right and we need to double down on. Number one is the culture piece. I started this talking about culture. I think we got our culture right. We trust and empower our folks in the services, between the services, and between our military and our like-minded allies. Trust, training, and teamwork will get you far. And number two is alliances, the value of alliances. Having like-minded partners, where you train together, you trust one another, that is how you deter, that's how you prevent this stuff from happening in the first place. And if God forbid it does happen, that's how you stop it and win it decisively. Back in the late 30s, early 40s, there were bad actors who ended up costing the world 60 to 80 million lives. And our greatest generation stopped that. Today's our time. Somebody's trying to do that again, and it would be just criminal if we don't step up. All that's necessary for evil to flourish in the world, for good men to do nothing. So I'll end there.
Excellent. Thank you. Craig, we're out of time, but you guys, a quick closing?
Yeah, 30 seconds or less. I would say it's important that everybody remembers why wars are fought, right? They're human endeavor trying to address some political issues. So oftentimes, and I think we've seen this back home, a lot of people like to immediately stampede towards stuff, right? Technology and things that go boom and such. And those things are all important. You need those capabilities on the battlefield. They're force multipliers. But remember, you have to solve the root cause of whatever the conflict is being fought for. And if you don't have that in place, you can have all the stuff in the world. You can have all those other shiny objects out on the battlefield, but you've got to make sure that whatever you do, you're solving the objectives that you went to war with in the first place, or it's just going to continue to drag on.
Excellent. Thanks, Craig. We're definitely out of time, but I want to thank our panel for coming out and discussing this and telling North America what's going on here. Our board, our advisory board, works without compensation. They are of a like mind that this is important enough to do, that they come out on their own time. Our senior leadership, our board of directors, our advisory board, all work without compensation because we see the importance of that. Right now, because of this transition we've seen in terms of education demand, we're getting calls from the J7, the general staff, different quarters, different units, the Kiev Polytechnic, different parts of government asking for education and training. There's this realization that they can do it much more effectively. And so we're trying to scale up to do that kind of education for them. And so we appreciate all the support our supporters can give us financially. We have the infrastructure, we have the team in place. We just need to be able to scale it up. And for that, I want to thank the advisory board and everyone who supports us. I'd like to thank our Ukrainian staff. We have, to be honest, we have a fantastic advisory board of directors. Our Ukrainian staff is unique, and they're doing a fantastic job. Anyone who comes out to Kiev and wants to meet with us, we're happy to introduce them and tell you more about what we're doing. But we'll close on that, and thanks very much.